Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Ray. I'm a detransition male, and today I'm going to be talking about the social construction of the identity of the homosexual transsexual, or the classic transsexual, the trans woman who's true trans, a true transsexual. And we're all familiar with this archetype because this is the archetype of the classical transsexual story that you used to see on all the news programs during the, like ABC, 60 Minutes, and all the stuff, and all these documentaries during the trans tipping point. And the classical story, for example, like Jazz Jennings, you have a very young boy, in childhood, 3, 4, 5 years old, very, very effeminate, becomes interested in like, Barbies and dolls and playing with girl things and wearing dresses and like, and starts to sort of identify and, have like gender identity issues and like being confused about, whether they're a boy or a girl and stuff like this. And like claiming to be like a girl. And according to Ray Blanchard, who developed the Blanchardian typology between the homosexual transsexual and the autogynephilic transsexual, he like basically said there's like two primary paths, two major etiologies or causal pathways into trans identification for male to female transsexuals. On the one hand, you have the autogynephiles who they're go down the transition pathway because they have an internalized attraction to the idea of themselves embodying femininity. Whereas on the other case, the homosexual transsexual, they're pulled into or pushed into the transition pathway because essentially they are extremely effeminate men and they have a hard time, socially in the dating world, being the feminine men because they're often attracted to straight men and straight men aren't attracted to feminine men. So in order to be attractive to the men that they want to date, because the homosexual transsexuals are exclusively attracted to men. So in order to be attractive to the men they want to date, they sort of have this desire to basically, this fantasy of being like a straight woman, just a regular straight woman, who has, regular husband and they fall in love and, 2 kids and a picket fence and all this stuff. So they have that fantasy of having like a regular hetero sex life, dating straight men because they're attracted to masculine men. But in the gay community, there's this perception of like, mask for mask, no femmes. And so they think that, no one's going to love them as a feminine gay man. They often get shamed for their effeminacy. And like these young homosexuals, these young gay boys, they can't hide their effeminacy. Whereas the AGPs, they're capable of hiding their desire to be feminine. Often for the AGP, the femininity is only displayed in sort of like more private sessions where it's like, or it's all in like your mind, but you're not like, but no one's going to think like, oh yeah, that AGP kid is like a total sissy boy. Whereas the homosexual transsexual often was made fun of for explicitly being a sissy boy. Now, one thing you hear from homosexual transsexuals, they'll say like it was impossible to live as a feminine gay man. That I'm true trans, I have this true identity. I'm really and that like the only way for me to exist as a homosexual transsexual is to take on the trans identity, pursue hormones and surgeries, blah blah blah. So my contention for this video is that that pathway, that treatment pathway, that intervention pathway to basically offer trans identification to affirm that yes, you are in fact a girl, you're not a boy, you're not just a feminine boy, you're not just a feminine gay boy, like you are in fact a girl. So that affirmative pathway that affirms the child's identification as the opposite sex, then offering the medical protocol to offer surgeries and hormones and like breast augmentation and like facial feminization surgery and all of these things to basically try to turn themselves into a object of attraction for straight men. So that whole pathway, I think all that stuff, like all that social construction stuff is, I think, that is a social construction. And why I say this is because the homosexual transsexual or effeminate gay men, like that phenotype in males has been seen all across the world in different cultures. So in Samoa, there's basically this concept of a fa'afafine. So the fa'afafina are or fa'afafina, I don't know. They're sort of like in the West, we like this idea of like third gender or kind of like the ladyboys of Thailand. They're like sort of very similar to like the ladyboys of Thailand. It's essentially these are it's a distinctive social category carved out explicitly for effeminate homosexual men so that they can and they have a particular social role that's like carved out, a social identity as fafafina. It essentially means like effeminate man, essentially. Now there's this guy, Paul Vassi, who's a scientist who's been studying the Fafafina, and he had an interesting tweet. He said, having interviewed around 400 plus Fafafina in Samoa over 21 years, few have expressed a desire to surgically hormonally feminize their bodies. I know only a few who have done so. I know only of one Fafafine who possibly committed, who self deleted. But even this is a question. So, this whole narrative in the West, in America, that if we don't offer these young homosexual transsexuals, if we don't offer them this hormonal pathway, this medicalization pathway, then they're going to develop such severe gender dysphoria that they're going to have a medically necessary ideation towards self-deletion that becomes medically necessary to intervene and offer this medicalized pathway as the only pathway. Now, my contention is that that whole set of assumptions and stereotypes and expectations and the cultural identity of trans woman and all the baggage that comes with that, that is a social construction of the West. And the medical and the dysphoria that comes from not being able to medicalize is a socially constructed artifact. Whereas if you were raised in a culture where the effeminacy, the sissy boys, are not demonized, they're not suppressed, they're not shamed, and they have a possibility for a respected life, or you sort of slot into society. Society has a template for you, a model for you, a script for you. And in Samoa, that script does not involve the ideological belief that these are actually really women on the inside. The Fafafina know they're male, they know they're men, they just know that they're feminine men. They're Fafafina. They have that social category. So they're comfortable with their natal sex, because they're not shamed for being feminine as men. Whereas in the West, because of so much of the conservatism and the religiosity and the homophobia and the long history of like evangelical Christianity demonizing homophobia, demonizing sissy boys, demonizing effeminacy, all this stuff, like and all the shame and the bullying that comes from that. And the sort of mask for mask culture and like the gay community, all that stuff leads to these young effeminate sissy boys to basically they have an identity crisis. And then in the West, we've offered this socially constructed identity of trans women and the medical pathway as the only option. But we have to realize that that whole concept, that whole pathway, that whole intervention protocol is a socially constructed option, and it's not a necessity. It is not inevitable. It is not inevitable that these gay boys go down this medical pathway and take on a trans identity and buy into gender identity ideology that says that they're true trans, that they have a true trans essence, and the explanation for all their behavior is that they're truly trans. And that this leads to the lie, the empirical lie, the falsehood that there's an essential ontological difference between gender non-conforming gay boys and true trans kids. Because this argument that I'm trying to make undermines the idea that we can, with accuracy, diagnose who is true trans versus who is just a gender non-conforming effeminate gay boy. Because I'm telling you, if you took one of these Fa'afafine boys and they were adopted and put into a super woke, progressive, hyper leftist, Munchausen mother household in 2016, then that Fa'afafine boy would likely be identified as a trans kid. Ooh, they're interested in feminine things. They must be a trans kid. So therefore, we're going to affirm the delusion that they're actually the opposite sex, and we're going to push them down a medical pathway as the only way to deal with this thing, and we're going to gaslight them into thinking that if they don't have access to this medical pathway, then it is normal. It is normal behavior to develop ideation about self deletion. So that whole like concept that of the 41% or whatever, that is a socially constructed meme. And it is it just doesn't reflect the actual reality. So all right, I think I made my point. Hopefully this was clear in terms of what I'm trying to argue here. But basically, the homosexual transsexual is a socially constructed identity and not an ontological essence that carves nature at its joints. All right, that's it for this video. Thanks for watching. Take care. Bye bye.